Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. And we've reached so high, and we look each day and night in the eye. I've got no rhythm. And today I want to talk to you about four literary white whales. Four of my literary white whales. And by white whale, I'm talking about books that have kind of defeated me up till this point. Books that I think of as my nemeses. Books that I know I want to read and have thus far not succeeded. And I'll give you some examples of those. I think I've got four, only one of which I have actually here because that's the whole point about them. They have defeated me and I don't have the other three. And I'll talk about each one why. But just to explain a little bit, A White Whale is not a book that I've made peace with the fact that I'm never going to read it. So, for example, I read the first three volumes of Proust's La Recherche de Temps Perdu. I've kind of made my peace with the fact that I'm not going any further with that. I read The Hobbit, which I loved, and I read The Lord of the Rings, which I really did not love when I was a teenager, because I was into Dungeons and Dragons and I liked fantasy and I was down for anything with an orc in it. I just got to the end of that. Lord of the Rings bored me silly, and I got to the end and said, no, I am not going to go out and buy the Silmarillion, which was the next stage. And I made my peace 40 years ago with the fact that I'm not going to read the Silmarillion ever in my life. I read Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. I read The Dubliners, and I slogged my way through Ulysses with vast amounts of it going over my head. And I made my peace with the fact that I'm never going to read Finnegan's Wake. It's not something I'm planning to do. It's not something, when I'm in the... No, I'm just not going to read in this lifetime. I'm not going to read Finnegan's Wake, and I'm okay with it. Those are not white whales. Another example of something which isn't a white whale is Moby Dick, which is, of course, where the expression white whales come from. I read Moby Dick, and this is typical of my reading, and I'll explain a little bit about my philosophy of reading. I'm a big advocate for reading things that you want. Read, enjoy it. I don't DNF, so I'm different to some people who will try something. If they don't like it, DNF. If I start something, I'm going to read it through to the end. So I curate my reading, I choose books, I challenge myself occasionally, but I like to read stuff. That's one aspect of my reading philosophy. Another one is that at an early age, as a reader, there were things that I thought I probably should read, things that I wanted to read or wanted to have read. Some of them have been very successful for me, and some of them less successful. So I read Moby Dick. This is, the book is dated here, August 1994, and I would have bought that secondhand for £3.50. Lovely classic. The red has faded, but this lovely penguin thing. This is, and calls it the definitive text. Not that I would know one way or the other. So in 1994, this is after I'm married, still living in London, working in London. This is after my degree, and I would have read this commuting to work every day. I would get on the tube if anyone knows the Northern Line. We lived in Burnt Oak, which is one before the end of the Northern Line, one branch of the Northern Line, and I would travel every day to Old Street, where I worked at the time, and that was about a 25-minute commute one way and 25-minute commute home. And so every day, the beauty of it is, before podcasts, before smartphones, every day I would get on the tube and read at least 50 pages, 25 minutes there and 25 minutes back would be 50 pages a day. And that is how I got through things like this. It was just, there was a momentum, and that's fed my reading throughout my life. So I read Moby Dick, liked it. Earlier in my reading career, I've got this copy of the Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky. I'd read Crime and Punishment, which I did enjoy and was a tough book. I read that on my year off in Israel. I bought this also in Israel a little bit later there. This bookshop doesn't exist. The book stop in Yosef Danawa Street in Jerusalem, and I don't know what I paid for this, but it would have been very cheap, I believe. This is a signet thing. It's got my name in it, March 91. So I don't know what I was doing. This is in the middle of my degree. I must have been visiting Israel. Since I've been in Israel for 2 years, back in London studying literature in London, and must have come to Israel that Passover 1991 and picked this up and read this and don't know much. I enjoyed Crime and Punishment, don't know much of that, but I have read it. Later on, it took me a while to find a copy that I wanted to read of War and Peace. I bought this secondhand for £5. Quite a big hardback, no dust cover, but it had a good what's it got in it? Yeah, really good bookmark that came with a list of all the characters. That was great, very useful. I read War and Peace and loved War and Peace. I'd already read Anna Karenina. So these examples, these were not White Whales, but these were books that I wanted to read and did conquer them. Infinite Jest. Bought this back in 1998. I was already living in Israel. This was a business trip. I was in Florida. Picked this up in Barnes and Noble. You can see I've kept the receipt there. This was I bought this £5.98. $5.98 for a copy of Infinite Jest, which even then, though this was a relatively new book, but that was obviously on bargain. Bought that, read that recently. Bought and read the Books of Jacob by Olga Tokarczuk, and she signed it for me when I met her last year. So, I'm not afraid of reading big books. These happen to all be big books. Not all my White Whales are big books. So it's not about the size of the book. It's about a book that I think I should probably read. Not because it's good for you, but because I want to be a person who has consumed these things and can join a conversation and take part in things. Okay, here are the 4 books that I have not yet conquered. The first one I have here. Bleak House by Charles Dickens. There's a whole bunch of Dickens that I haven't got to. I've read a handful of Dickens. I've read Tale of Two Cities, Hard Times, David Copperfield, and one or two others. Little Dorrit, maybe, or The Old Curiosity Shop. Sort of melded out. David Copperfield I really liked. Tale of Two Cities kind of went over my head a little bit. I actually enjoyed Hard Times, partly because it was short, it's sort of gateway Dickens, but also the subject matter. Bleak House, classic Dickens. I started this. So this is, I say I don't DNF books. This is a book in the last, I don't know when I got this. I bought this October 2002. So some point in the 3 or 4 years after 2002, I started this and read about 150, 200 pages, and just gave it. It was slowing me down. I had no momentum. I didn't have any big desire to read it, and it's one of the last books that I DNF'd. But I know that I want to get back and not only read Bleak House. I also have a copy of Martin Chuzzlewit in my TBR because I've gone out enthusiastically and optimistically bought another Dickens in this Penguin Classics and then finished Bleak House. I want to get to that. Another example of one of my White Whales is George Orwell's 1984. It's embarrassing and it hurts me to admit that I've never read 1984. I read Animal House and that's it. I haven't read any other Orwell. I haven't read any of his journalism. I've met teenagers who love and have read everything by George Orwell, and all I've read is Animal Farm, like a schoolboy. For whatever reason, 1984 was assigned to some other kids in school. It was never assigned to me, so I never read it. I've never come back to it. I know all about it. I know about the clock striking 13. I know about Room 101, is it? I know about Winston Smith, and I know about, but I've never read the book. I've had a copy, I think, back in my bedroom in the house I grew up. I think there was a copy of 1984, and I just never read it. So that's one of my White Whales on Bleak House. Another one is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. Again, this is a book that I had a copy of in that bedroom when I was growing up as a teenager. I think maybe my mother bought it for me. It was the kind of book that I could have and should have read because it was supposed to be accessible. It's a comic novel. It's about the Second World War, and we did a lot of First World War and Second World War writing when studying literature in school. First World War poets and a bit of all sorts of stuff. I read read a lot of Rupert Brooke and Siegfried Sassoon, and that was the First World War. And Second World War, well, it was still a bit close to us in those days. We're only about 30, obviously when I was a student in the 80s. But I remember starting Catch-22, understanding that some of it was funny, a character called Major, and just didn't click with Yossarian. Didn't get. I wasn't a big reader in those days, but it was a book, and it was probably a bit too thick. I don't know how big it's 450 pages, something like that. And I just never got on with it, and I've never gone back and read Catch-22, and now I don't own a copy. And I know it's a book that I should have in my canon. I should have access to, and I should have read. That's the third of my 4 White Whales I'm going to talk about. And the last one I want to talk about is another classic. So I had Bleak House. I've read Austen and I've read the Brontes. I've read a fair chunk of Hardy and George Eliot. I've expanded beyond the sort of the basic Victorians. And I've read Russians, and I've read George Gissing, who's a little bit less known. I still want to read more of that, and I've started with Mrs. Gaskell and read a few of those and want to read more of those. But there is one classic. I'm sure it's 19th century. just pause. I'm going to make sure it is Victorian ones. Okay, Ken Clay's Making a Fool of Myself. And yes, a Victorian a novel from 1848, Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. I've never read any Thackeray. I had a copy of Vanity Fair, like a horrible copy, years and years ago. Again, something that must have turned up in the house or maybe was already in the home. And I think I read maybe 10, 15, 20 pages and never got any further. And it haunts me. It is one of my white whales. I haven't read it. I feel like I should. It fits in with some of the other reading I've done. It's a great big chunky book. Yeah, I'll compare that to something like Clarissa, Samuel Richardson's Clarissa, which I've made my peace with the fact that I'm not going to read a 3,000-page book about a woman being treated badly. I'm okay with not reading that. I feel bad about not having read Vanity Fair. The ongoing. So I have a copy of Bleak House. I don't yet have copies of and it's not that I just don't have get them anytime I like, but I have always avoided getting copies of both 1984 and Catch 22. But in this year of not buying new books, I've got a copy of Bleak House, and actually I've been sent a copy. I signed up years ago for some online survey thing with Penguin Books. And, I fill in all the things. And every time they send me, have a look at this book cover. Do you like it? Do you think this is good? Have you read anything else by this author? Those kind of things. And I do them whenever they come in. And I've reached a certain level. And they sent me an email, the most wonderful email any human being can ever get. Daniel, thank you for your participation in the thing. You have reached platinum level. And please respond to this email and choose 2 books from our website. And one of them was anything from this, and one of them was anything from the cloth-bound classics line. Now, I don't have any of those. This is my preferred edition of classics. Is the older? They don't even print these anymore. But the older Penguin Classic with the red bar. There are older versions, and there is a newer version of the Penguin Classics. I've got a couple of the Oxford Worlds Classics that I'm reading the Zolas in, but I haven't got any of the cloth-bound classics. They're about £25 new, or £20, whatever. And I like to buy my classics secondhand. So I went in, I got to choose one book, and I've chosen a giant book of Salman Rushdie's essays. And then the cloth-bound classics that I've chosen is Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray, because I thought it's a white whale, it's my nemesis. If I'm going to read this book, let me read a big, chunky, clean edition, brand new. So both those books, the Salman Rushdie and Vanity Fair, are waiting for me in London, where I will be in about a month and a half's time for my nephew's wedding, hopefully. And that's it. So those are my 4 white whales: Bleak House, Catch 22, 1984, and Vanity Fair. I'm going to read at least one of them this year. I don't want to commit to reading Bleak House because I've done so well to avoid it. But as my TBR is shrinking, as I'm working my way through the books that I've had on the shelf for a long time, this should come up, as well as Vanity Fair. And that's it. Who are your literary white whales? I'd love to know. Take care. Bye.